Back in the 1980s, motorcycle manufacturers were taking risks. Some built machines that sold in the millions. Others created oddball experiments that barely left the factory floor. A few were so strange and scarce, they've almost disappeared from history. These are the 15 rarest and weirdest 1980s motorcycles you never knew about. Number 15. Honda CB1100R. Some bikes were built to sell, others were built to win. The Honda CB1100R fell firmly in the second camp. It was a machine you could buy from a dealer, but only because the rulebook said Honda had to sell a few to the public. It showed up in the early 1980s as a homologation special, the kind of bike that existed purely so Honda could take it racing. That meant production numbers stayed low, just enough to satisfy eligibility. If you saw one in a showroom back then, you were looking at a factory race bike in street clothes. Underneath the fairing sat an air-cooled inline-4 engine, displacing 1,062 cubic centimeters. It wasn't revolutionary in layout, but the tuning told a different story. 4 Cayenne carburetors fed a close-ratio gearbox, and the whole setup was meant to live at high revs for hours at a time. This wasn't built for city commutes. It was built to chase lap times. On the road, it pulled hard with about 120 horsepower and roughly 72 pound-feet of torque. That combination made highway passes effortless and gave it real punch out of corners. Weight was kept reasonable for a big bike of its day, helping it feel stable without being sluggish. Top speed ran past 140 miles per hour, which put it right at the sharp end of early 80s performance. The riding position made its priorities clear: single seat, low clip-ons, and a chassis tuned for precision over comfort. Long trips weren't its strong point, but get it on a fast, flowing road, and it felt completely at home. What made it weird wasn't just how rare it was, but how unapologetically focused it stayed. In a decade when most large-capacity bikes tried to offer a bit of everything, the CB1100R gave you exactly one thing: race-bred performance. If you weren't going to use it that way, you were missing the point. By 1983, Honda had moved on to newer, liquid-cooled designs. The CB1100R left quietly, but in its short life, it embodied a rare, single-minded approach that the market rarely sees. A glimpse of a time when Honda built to the rulebook, not the brochure. Number 14. Honda XLV 750R. Every now and then, a manufacturer builds a bike that seems aimed at two completely different riders at once. The Honda XLV 750R was one of those. It looked like a rugged dual sport ready for the trail, but underneath it was built more like a long-distance tourer. That confusion is a big reason it's so rare today. Released in 1983, the XLV 750R was Honda's first large-capacity V-twin in the adventure category, though adventure was a loose term here. At its heart was an air and oil-cooled 45-degree V-twin, displacing 749 cubic centimeters, an engine design more at home in road bikes than dirt machines. It featured 3 valves per cylinder, twin spark plugs, and a dry sump system that stored oil in the frame. Clever engineering for endurance, not lightness. That durability focus extended to the shaft final drive, which eliminated chain maintenance altogether. On paper, it was practical. On the scales, it was heavy. At roughly 484 pounds wet, it outweighed most of its dual sport peers by a wide margin, making genuine off-road work a challenge. Torque came in at about 51 pound-feet, strong enough for steady road pulling, but far from aggressive. Its scarcity comes from several factors. Honda built fewer than 10,000 units over its entire run from 1983 to 1986. It was never officially sold in the United States or the United Kingdom, keeping it out of 2 major markets. And its identity never quite landed. Riders expecting off-road agility got a road-biased heavyweight. Those wanting a tourer found the tall stance and dirt tires out of place. There was also a small run of just 500 units with upgraded brakes and unique trim, now nearly impossible to find. These special versions shared the same mechanical core, but stood out for their details, from ventilated front discs to distinctive graphics and a blue seat strap. It wasn't a bad bike, but it was a machine without a clear role. Built with excellent reliability, dressed for off-road, and engineered for tarmac, it ended up as one of the most unusual combinations Honda ever put into production in the 1980s. Number 13. Honda Z50 RD Christmas Special. Most limited edition motorcycles wear their exclusivity in subtle paint or small badges. The Honda Z50 RD Christmas Special skipped subtlety entirely. It was a mini bike that arrived in a full chrome finish, looking more like a display piece than something meant to be ridden. Released in December of 1986, it was a special take on the Z50R, itself a popular small-scale bike in Honda's lineup. The RD designation stood for dealer, as these models were allocated directly to showrooms in extremely small numbers. Most dealers only received 2, making them scarce from day one. Beneath the mirror-like bodywork, the mechanics stayed true to the standard Z50R. Power came from an air-cooled single-cylinder engine, displacing 49 cubic centimeters. It used a 3-speed semi-automatic gearbox and simple drum brakes, keeping the riding experience easy and approachable. None of that was unusual. What was unusual was the complete transformation of every visible surface into polished chrome, from the fenders to the tank to the frame itself. Performance was modest, with a top speed just under 30 miles per hour, but speed wasn't the point. This was a bike meant to catch the eye before it ever turned a wheel. It became an instant conversation piece in showrooms, drawing in customers during the holiday season, and in many cases, it never left the dealership floor. Its rarity today comes not only from the low production, but from the fact that many were never treated as serious motorcycles. Some sat in storage for decades, others were given as novelty gifts, and very few were used regularly. Finding one in original, unmarked condition is a challenge, as any blemish on that chrome finish stands out instantly. The Z50RD Christmas Special occupies a strange space in Honda's history. It wasn't built to push technology forward or to dominate a racing class. It was built to be noticed, to make an impression, and perhaps to show that even the smallest bike in the range could be turned into something unique. In the process, it became one of the most distinctive and hard-to-find machines Honda ever produced in the 1980s. If you think these machines are rare, wait until you see what's coming. The real surprises are still ahead. Hit that like button, subscribe, and keep watching. You won't believe how unusual some of the next motorcycles turned out to be. Number 12, Kawasaki KR1. There are bikes that you ride for their smoothness, and then there are bikes that demand everything you have. The Kawasaki KR1 was that kind of machine, a razor-sharp, lightweight two-stroke that did nothing quietly, and that edge is why it earned its oddball reputation. Born in 1988, the KR1 was Kawasaki's entry into the fiercely competitive quarter-liter two-stroke sport bike class. Beneath the full fairing sat a liquid-cooled parallel twin two-stroke engine, displacing 249 cubic centimeters. An advanced setup for its time, it used Kawasaki's KIPS power valve system and a cassette-style 6-speed gearbox, all pointing to one purpose: screaming power delivery in a tight package. On the road, its output hovered around 55 horsepower at 10,500, with torque that built slowly but turned explosive once the revs climbed. That throttle response made it feel untamed. Weighing in at just around 271 pounds dry, it could change direction with the slightest input, making every corner a test of precision. It wasn't mellow, it was surgical. That speed came with danger. The KR1 could push top speeds north of 130 miles per hour, and thanks to its featherweight build, anything less than pristine suspension setup could trigger nasty front-end shake. Reliability was another issue. The precise machining required wasn't always up to spec, meaning seized barrels and fragile engines were not uncommon. Production numbers were low, especially when compared to its rivals. Across its entire run, worldwide figures stayed under 10,000 units, and the most sought-after KR1R, built to homologate it for racing, numbered just 180 examples in Japan, making them mythical for collectors. What made it truly strange was how extreme it was. It wasn't softly tuned for commuting, nor dressed for cruising. It was designed to find the limit every single time. That razor-focused character, combined with delicate engineering and low volume, carved it a unique place in motorcycling history. Riding a KR1 is not about comfort or practicality. It's about chasing that pure, unforgiving edge, and only a few machines dared show up like that back then. Number 11, Suzuki GSX-R 750. Some motorcycles redefine expectations the moment you swing a leg over them. The Suzuki GSX-R 750 was one of those. It combined the feel of a full-blown race machine with the accessibility of a showroom model, and that combination was unlike anything riders were used to in the mid-80s. Launched in 1985, the GSX-R 750 broke from convention. Instead of a traditional steel frame, it used a square-section aluminum cradle that cut weight without sacrificing rigidity. This lightweight chassis was matched to an air and oil-cooled inline-4, displacing 749 cubic centimeters, an engine built with the kind of focus normally reserved for track bikes. Output sat just under 100 horsepower, but the delivery was what made it feel so alive. Torque built smoothly, urging the rider higher into the rev range, where the bike's character really came through. At roughly 388 pounds dry, it was significantly lighter than many of its rivals, and that made every corner feel sharper and every straight stretch vanish more quickly. The ergonomics told you exactly what Suzuki intended. Clip-on handlebars, rear-set foot pegs, and a tucked riding position put you in the mindset of a racer before you even rolled away. It wasn't a bike for relaxed Sunday rides. It was built to be ridden with purpose. Its reputation was cemented quickly on both the street and the track. Privateer racers flocked to it because it was competitive right out of the crate, and endurance racing teams valued its balance of speed and durability. In 1986, Suzuki pushed things even further with the GSXR 750R, a limited run of around 500 units fitted with a dry clutch, close ratio gearbox, and lighter bodywork, built specifically for homologation. What made the GSXR 750 unusual wasn't just its speed or its race pedigree. It was how uncompromising it was for a production motorcycle. It demanded attention, both in setup and in riding, and rewarded only those willing to ride it the way it was designed to be ridden. For many, it became the defining sport bike of the era. For others, it was simply too focused. But for anyone lucky enough to experience it, the GSX R750 was proof that a factory-built machine could deliver the raw intensity of the racetrack without ever leaving the road. Number 10, Honda VFR 750R C30. You know a bike went beyond the showroom when it looks like it belongs on a racetrack, and the Honda VFR 750R RC30 was unapologetically that bike. Honda didn't just aim to make a fast superbike. They built one for serious competition, street legal only because they had to. Introduced in 1987, the VFR 750R RC30 arrived in limited numbers to meet world superbike homologation rules. At its core was a gear-driven double overhead cam 90-degree V4 engine, displacing 748 cubic centimeters. It was packed with race-ready hardware, titanium connecting rods, high-compression internals, all wrapped into a chassis forged for the track more than your local road. Its output hit about 112 horsepower at 11,000 RPM, while torque landed around 53.5 pound-feet at 10,500. That kind of power to weight is extraordinary, especially when the bike tipped the scales at just around 408 pounds dry. It wasn't tuned for comfort, it was tuned for lap times. Top speed hovered near 153 miles per hour, and every glance at its single-seat fairing, single-sided swing arm, and race-style brakes tells you exactly why. The suspension was fully adjustable and built for precision, and the frame carried the weight low and tight. Production was strictly capped. Only around 3,000 units rolled out globally before Honda shifted focus. That scarcity alone made it stand out. Add in the fact that each component felt over-engineered and purposeful, and the result is a machine that hardly needed riders to appreciate how rare it was. In its day, it dominated races and rewrote what a road-legal superbike could mean. Today, seeing one still feels like spotting a high-end prototype that escaped the track and landed in your garage. Number 9. Suzuki RG 500 Gamma. In the mid-1980s, Suzuki decided to do something few manufacturers would even consider today: sell a motorcycle that was essentially a Grand Prix race machine with a license plate. That motorcycle was the Suzuki RG 500 Gamma, and it still stands as one of the most extreme production bikes of its time. Most road-going sport bikes were inspired by the track. The RG 500 Gamma skipped the inspired by stage and went straight to copied from. Its liquid-cooled square-four two-stroke engine displaced 498 cubic centimeters and came directly from Suzuki's World Championship program, complete with twin crankshafts, rotary valve induction, and expansion chambers. This was engineering normally reserved for paddock tents and factory race teams, not showroom floors. That direct connection to racing made it thrilling and unforgiving in equal measure. Below a certain point in the rev range, it was almost docile, but once the power band hit, it delivered an abrupt surge that could overwhelm unprepared riders. With around 95 horsepower pushing a dry weight of roughly 340 pounds, and steering that reacted instantly to the smallest input, it felt alive in a way few street bikes ever had, and that also made it easy to get into trouble. Its rarity wasn't just about production numbers, though those were low. Built for only a few years, it was never officially sold in many markets, and plenty of the ones that did get purchased were bought by racers or track day riders. Many were crashed, heavily modified, or simply worn out, leaving original examples scarce today. What made the RG 500 Gamma truly unusual was how little it was adapted for everyday use. There was no real attempt at comfort, no concessions to long-distance practicality, and no smoothing out of the engine's sharp character. It was a machine that demanded skill, commitment, and constant attention. In a decade when most big-name sport bikes were chasing a balance between performance and usability, Suzuki built one that chased performance alone. That single-minded approach is why the RG500 Gamma still has a reputation decades later. It wasn't just fast, and it wasn't just rare. It was a motorcycle that treated the road like a racetrack without apology. In many ways, it was the purest link between the average rider and Suzuki's GP dominance, and nothing quite like it has been offered since. Number 8. Suzuki DR 750S. Few motorcycles come looking like they belong in a desert rally, then shockingly turn out to be legal for the road. That was the Suzuki DR 750S, a bike that wore its Dakar DNA in its styling and engineering, but landed in driveways instead of pits. Debuting in 1988, it wasn't just an adventure bike. It was essentially a replica of Suzuki's factory DR Zeta rally mount. Under that tall front beak fairing and generous fuel tank sat a big single engine tilted toward punishing terrain. It displaced 727 cubic centimeters, delivering torque in a broad, firm wave that would haul you out of sandpits or keep cruising on highways, long past sunset. The frame was lighter than you'd expect, and by keeping the weight just under 395 pounds dry, Suzuki managed to make something big feel manageable, if not nimble. Still, it wasn't an easy crossover. Its suspension was long travel and made for off-road punishment, not tailored comfort. The seat was firm, the bar position tall, and long rides took patience. Yet riders who understood why it was built appreciated its virtue. This wasn't about comfort. It was about going beyond where most bikes could. Its rarity comes from being too rugged for most and too specific for many others. Suzuki only made it for a couple of years before replacing it with an even bigger model. It never sold in massive numbers, and it wasn't offered in many markets. Add the fact that many owners put them straight in the dirt, and original examples with intact tanks and plastic are hard to find now. What made the DR 750S unusual wasn't just its size or desert styling. It threw away the idea that adventure bikes needed to be polished or versatile. Instead, it embraced a tougher ethos. If adventure unsettles you, it becomes irrelevant. The DR Big may not have won beauty contests, but it earned street survival stamps. Riders who found one still appreciate how ferocious it felt, how stubbornly real it was, and how rarity and rally routes aren't often found together on a road-legal motorcycle. Number 7. Suzuki Katana GSX 1100S. In the early 1980s, motorcycle styling was cautious. Then, Suzuki unveiled the Katana GSX 1100S, and cautious went straight out the window. It was a production bike that looked like it had come from a science fiction sketchbook, and that shock value still defines it. Launched in 1981, the Katana was the result of Suzuki handing the design brief to a German styling team led by Hans Muth. The goal was to create a machine that would stand out in any lineup, and the result was a sharp, low-slung silhouette unlike anything else on sale. Long, flat body lines, a steeply raked nose, and a cockpit-style fairing gave it an almost weapon-like stance. Underneath, it was built on the proven GSX 1100 platform, with an air-cooled inline-four, displacing 1,074 cubic centimeters. Power was strong for the time at just over 111 horsepower, but it was the way the bike carried it, stable at high speed, slightly heavy in the steering, that made it feel planted rather than twitchy. The Katana's unusual nature wasn't limited to its appearance. It blurred categories before sport touring was a marketing term. The riding position leaned the rider forward more aggressively than most big bikes, yet the wide, padded seat suggested long-distance comfort. This left some riders unsure of what Suzuki intended it to be, which kept it from becoming a mainstream choice despite strong performance. Its rarity today is partly because so many were modified. Owners swapped bars, cut fairings, and repainted bodywork to tame the Katana's polarizing looks. Finding an original example with its full fairing and distinctive paint is far harder than the production numbers suggest. In its day, the Katana was a statement as much as a motorcycle. It told the market that Suzuki was willing to risk alienating some buyers if it meant building something unforgettable. Decades later, it remains instantly recognizable, not because it followed trends, but because it ignored them completely. The GSX 1100S wasn't designed to blend in. It was built to stand apart, and that is exactly what it still does. Number 6. BMW R80GS. Before adventure bikes became a genre, BMW built a motorcycle that didn't belong anywhere, and that's exactly what makes the R80GS unusual. It wasn't a trail bike or a tourer. It was something in between, yet still utterly its own beast. When it appeared in 1980, riders had seen big on-road bikes and rugged off-road machines. The R80GS blurred that line completely. It paired a flat twin boxer engine of nearly 800 cubic centimeters with a long travel fork and a shaft drive swing arm that kept the rear wheel grounded over rough terrain. It looked ready to roam deserts, yet came with mirrors, lights, and all the legal bits for the road. At about 427 pounds dry, it wasn't feather light, but it handled differently than anything else its weight. It felt stable standing upright, yet flexible when leaned, thanks to suspension designed for grit, not comfort. That duality made it both compelling and confusing. Some riders admired its capability, others shrugged it off as neither one thing nor the other. Its rarity and strangeness run deeper than design. BMW only made just over 21,000 units across 7 years. Then they offered a Paris-Dakar edition, complete with a 32-liter tank, solo seat, and guest signatures. These numbered less than 3,000. That kind of niche offering meant only diehards chased it, while everyone else stuck to familiar models. More than that, the R80GS was the unexpected pioneer of a segment that didn't even exist yet. It became the blueprint for everything from modern adventure tours to rugged dual sports. Yet at the time, most riders didn't know what to make of it, and few knew to keep theirs unaltered. Today, clean examples with original tanks, seats, and suspension setups are harder to find than the numbers suggest. It wasn't flashy, it didn't hug tight corners or look pretty in a parking lot, but it did something unique, drawing a path from motorcycles to landscapes most thought unreachable. The R80GS didn't ask to be grouped. It defined its own category, and rarer than that only make it weirder and much more compelling. Number 5. Yamaha XV 400 Virago. Sometimes the strangest bikes are the ones that seem built for comfort, but just a little bit off. The Yamaha 15 400 Virago was exactly that, a cruiser at heart, yet carrying quirks that quietly set it apart. When it rolled out in the mid-80s, the Virago family was Yamaha's answer to America's cruiser boom. The 1500 Virago in particular used a V-twin engine tilted forward and air-cooled to deliver smooth torque, yet looked different than the upright cruisers of its day. That lean-in stance, paired with a displacement of 400 cubic centimeters, made it feel both familiar and subtly unconventional. Its setup wasn't aggressive, power came in gentle, and the bike weighed modestly for a cruiser. But what was weirdly rare was how Yamaha chose to build it. With confirmed chain drive and a pushrod iteration of the Big Brother's power plant, it wasn't the easiest model to justify in the mid-80s. It sat between a classic commuter bike and a full cruiser, never fully one or the other. Production numbers reflect that confusion. Yamaha made far fewer XV 400 Viragos than its larger siblings, especially in the US market. A supplier-friendly design went head-to-head with reserved rider demand. That mismatch meant many were quietly phased out of lineups, and fewer were registered, making unmodified survivors more elusive than you'd expect for a yarn-sized cruiser. Beyond numbers, it carried stylistic details that make it feel odd today. A slightly forward rake, a narrow seat, and trim that nodded to its bigger brothers without fully committing. It carried that independent vibe into a segment built on tradition and conformity. The end result? A bike that didn't fit as an easy classic, a cheap commuter, or a hardcore cruiser. It lived in the shoulders of categories, and that living in the shadows reputation is precisely why it's rare to spot one untouched today, and why its quirks feel quietly compelling. Number 4. Kawasaki GPZ 900R. Few motorcycles changed everything so quietly. The Kawasaki GPZ 900R arrived in 1984, fully fared, packed with cutting-edge engineering, and nobody quite knew what to do with it. That dissonance is exactly what makes it one of the most unusual bikes of its era. It wasn't cheap, it wasn't understated, and it wasn't ordinary. Kawasaki spent years developing a new 16-valve, liquid-cooled, inline 4-cylinder engine, nearly 900 cubic centimeters, and tucked it into a chassis built around that motor as a stressed member. It was a clear pivot into modern sport bike territory, well before most competitors caught up. If you looked closely, it had tech no one else bothered with, such as anti-dive forks and a lighter straight-line feel, and still produced a claimed 115 horsepower with torque, peaking near 63 pound-feet. But the bike's true oddness came from how capable it felt. It moved like a middleweight machine, not a lumbering superbike, yet still leaned into performance with the poise only a bike designed with such precision could deliver. Production wasn't mass market, even though it was a hit. The GPZ spawned the first Ninja badge in the US, but stickers don't define rarity, only behavior does. In the UK, it quietly outlived two successors before the 90s rolled around. Riders either bought in and kept theirs intact, or modified them to fit older styles, making truly original examples harder to find than the bike's influence suggests. Even the way it ended up in pop culture felt odd. A Kawasaki at the center of Top Gun, fast and sleek, flanked by jets, helping launch an outlier into mainstream awareness. The GPZ 900R is rare, not just because few resist its pull, but because it rewrote what street bike could mean, without giving any half measures. It never wavered between sport and tour. It simply pointed forward and didn't look back. No wonder seeing one today still makes you pause. It's a reminder that for a moment, Kawasaki built a bike that didn't just lead its category, it created it. Number 3, Yamaha VMAX. When the VMAX launched in 1986, it looked familiar on paper. A V4 cruiser with a low seat, sweeping lines, and shaft drive. But under that bodywork was something most riders had not felt on a street bike. The engine displaced 1,280 cubic centimeters and was based on Yamaha's VMAX racing program. That gave it muscle car torque. Its character was less about top speed and more about shove, launching you forward the moment you rolled on the throttle. It wasn't subtle. Riders describe how it felt almost rude in its acceleration, pulling hard, fast, and without hesitation. The air and oil-cooled V4 delivered power so abruptly that it made other big cruisers feel calm by comparison. And while its weight was typical for a V4 at about 550 pounds dry, it felt light at highway pace, thanks to that relentless shove and firm chassis behavior. That edge, combined with limited production in many markets, is what made the VMAX rare. Yamaha didn't make as many as their more commuter-friendly models, and early buyers tended to ride them hard. Some were drag raced, others were heavily customized. That means finding an original, unmodified example now means digging through surviving bone stock carefully. What makes it weird isn't the horsepower or displacement. It's how it blended performance and cruiser form in one package when most were easing into the cruiser boom with comfort and chrome. Here was a bike that looked like nostalgia but felt like performance, immediately, always, and without compromise. It didn't try to blend in with Harley clones or welcoming ergonomics. It was a wild card. Decades later, spotting an untouched VMAX still makes riders pause. It's the kind of bike that refused to play by cruiser rules. Instead, it asked the road to keep up or get out of the way. Number 2, Ducati 851 Strada. There are bikes that feel like they were created to rewrite expectations. The Ducati 851 Strada was one of them. It didn't just push the boundaries of what a sport bike could do, it pulled them apart and disappeared into a new category. When it debuted in 1989, the Strada was Ducati's answer to rising competition in the superbike world. What made it odd, even radical, was that it wasn't built for one clear purpose. It housed a liquid-cooled, 4-valve per-cylinder V-twin, displacing 850-odd cubic centimeters, with fuel injection grafted onto a platform that looked like it belonged on a racetrack. That meant tech people expected in the pricier segment, squeezed into a package, meant for street use. The bike delivered punchy performance at around 79 horsepower, with torque spilling in low and completing a broad, usable spread. It felt like a sport bike when called upon, but it was shaped for longer stints and characterized by its dual nature presence. Riders quickly noted how the trellis frame delivered precision at high speeds, but remained forgiving in everyday corners. Rare for a naked sport bike setup of its era, and that dual quality left many dealers and riders uncertain which audience it served. Production numbers tell the rest of the story. Ducati made fewer of the Strada than they did of their more conventional models. It wasn't imported selectively. Instead, many markets received limited allocations. Enthusiasts loved its tech. Traditional riders found the hybrid character too much of a middle ground. So many disappeared into garages or became modified into cafe racers before the Strada got its collector merit. What makes the 851 Strada weird isn't a single feature. It's how it managed to straddle the line between race tech and street bike without relinquishing either. It didn't lean into nostalgia or chase comfort. It leaned into capability, yet behaved quietly practical. Seeing one today feels like spotting a gap in time, a bike that existed because Ducati chose to experiment, not because the market demanded it. Number 1. Honda Africa Twin XRV 650. In the late 1980s, adventure bikes were still finding their identity. Most manufacturers were either building light off-road singles or heavy touring machines with little in between. The Honda Africa Twin XRV 650 broke that pattern. It was a motorcycle born directly from rally racing, adapted just enough to wear a license plate, and that made it stand out as something entirely different. Its story started in the Paris-Dakar Rally, where Honda's factory NXR dominated the desert. The XRV 650 took that DNA and packaged it for real-world riders. Under its bodywork sat a 52-degree V-twin engine, displacing 647 cubic centimeters. It wasn't built for record-breaking horsepower, but for consistent, tractable delivery, something you could trust as much on a mountain pass as you could in a sand wash. The design leaned heavily on long-distance function. A tall windscreen and rally-style fairing kept fatigue low on highway runs, while a large fuel tank, just over 6 gallons, meant fewer stops between remote fuel points. Even though it tipped the scales at just under 485 pounds fully fueled, careful weight distribution and long travel suspension kept it stable in the rough. What made it rare wasn't just its short production run, between 1988 and 1989. In many markets, the model was never officially imported, and where it did arrive, it appealed to a narrow slice of riders. Those who understood its rally heritage prized its capabilities, but the broader market leaned towards simpler and cheaper dual sports. Many examples were ridden hard, modified heavily, or taken on long expeditions, so unaltered survivors have become difficult to find. The Africa Twin's personality was part of its strangeness. It wasn't trying to be stylish or trendy. It carried functional Dakar features into a street environment without compromise. High ground clearance, handguards, a skid plate, and off-road gearing made it feel like a competition bike in everyday use. At the same time, the smoothness of the V-twin and its relaxed cruising nature gave it a character very different from the thumping singles most riders associated with adventure travel at the time. Today, spotting an original XRV 650 is like catching a glimpse of an alternate path motorcycle development could have taken. It was a product of pure rally engineering, dropped into a world that hadn't yet caught up. That's why, decades later, it remains one of the most distinctive and elusive adventure motorcycles ever built. These motorcycles weren't just products of their time, they were experiments, risks, and one-off visions that still turn heads today. Drop your pick for the rarest 80s bike in the comments, hit like, and make sure you're subscribed for the next list.